This is the Undying Nephilim, and today I'm going to show you guys the next faction that is going to be added into Hyrule Conquest, and that is the Stalfos. One of my favorite factions, if not my favorite. Probably not my favorite, but they're definitely one of my favorites. Near the top for sure, because they got a lot of really cool stuff, which I'll show most of it today. But before I begin the video, I would like to point your attention up here, and if you'll notice, this is the 0.25 version of 0AD, which we've gotten most things kind of working in it finally, after 8 months. As I said in my last video when I talked about the Sheikah, the new version of 0AD pretty much broke everything we'd added into Hyrule Conquest. It broke Knockback, it broke Exodarian's battalions and the way his units spawn from buildings. It broke tons and tons of things, and it's taken Exo and Ascaris 8 months, mostly Ascaris at this point. It's taken them pretty much 8 months to get things relatively stable, and most things are stable, but there's still a few things that are not working properly. Like, Knockback technically works, but there's still some wonkiness in it. If you're attacked by a predator, like a lever, like a wild animal, and you kill them, they won't register as dead and they'll keep attacking you, so you can't fend off predators. They're basically invulnerable, although, as I'm recording this, Ascaris pretty much just messaged me, and it seems like he thinks he actually knows what's causing that problem with levers, so that might be fixed as of this very moment, but point is, there's still quite a few bugs and issues with the 0.25 version, and because of that, I don't know if I want to release this to patrons until those things are fixed out. I normally don't record these videos until I'm ready to have patrons go ahead and play as the faction that I'm talking about. I always say at the end of the video, oh, patrons, you can go ahead and download this, and then sometime in the next month it'll be released for the public. But I don't think the Stalfos will be released for patrons at the end of this video. However, if you are a patron and you're willing to put up with some really, really freaking weird bugs, go ahead and message me, and I'll go ahead and send you the Stalfos so you can try them out. It's gonna be something you do at your own peril, I guess, instead of me just releasing it for all the patrons. But anyway, with that out of the way, let me get a swig of water, and I think I'll go ahead and talk about the Stalfos. Let's go ahead and pick some of the heroes at random, and I'll go ahead and begin. I might save their heroes for another video if for some reason I go on like longer than an hour. If for some reason I'm less than an hour, I'll go ahead and divide this video into like 2 parts, and the second half of the video will be about their heroes. Anyway, the Stalfos. So, I guess I will start with a bit of their lore and background. I don't want to go into too much detail because I honestly want to keep some of it under wraps, but I can go ahead and talk a little bit about the history of Stalfos in Nephi canon. So, in Nephi canon, several thousand years in the past, once upon a time, necromancy was kind of common in mostly Western Hyrule. So, like in the Gerudo Desert, all the kind of western area, in the forests it was common. The Kingdom of Icona was around. They practiced necromancy. It was just kind of a thing that was part of the daily lives of the pre-Hylian civilizations, who were pretty depraved and messed up. So, when the ancient Akalans came and conquered the Hyrulean mainland, and they became the Hylians, they pretty much were like, no, this necromancy stuff is bad. It's an abomination. We're going to outlaw it. We're going to ban it. It's going to be illegal, and if you practice it, you're freaking dead. So, the ancient Akalans and the Hylians basically purged all of Hyrule of necromancy, and it was pretty much gone for several thousand years. You know, a few practitioners kind of were able to eke out little esoteric cults in the desert, in the west, and it kind of survives in like little small cults and stuff like that. But for the most part, it's pretty much gone from Hyrule for who knows how long. Quick, you know, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, very, very long time. Long enough to where it's kind of a myth. But in modern times, kind of necromantic activity seems to be popping up here and there. Stall children are popping up in Hyrule Field every now and again. You know, there's kind of reports of Stalfos here and there. So, seems like it's on the rise. And in true Nifty Canon fashion, it's not random. So I'll go ahead and leave it at that. And I'll probably be talking about mostly gameplay stuff for the rest of this video. So that's it for the kind of background on the faction. A little less detailed than normal, because I want to keep them under wraps. But anyway, first thing you probably noticed is that the Stalfos, they do not start on the actual start location that all the other factions start on at the moment. And that is because the Stalfos require ruins in order to make their buildings. They have to capture ruins on a map and then convert them into the buildings that they need to build. And because of that, their buildings will actually look like the ruins on a map. So I'm playing on the Gerudo Oasis map. So their buildings currently kind of have like the desert sort of aesthetic. So if I'm playing on the like on Death Mountain, the ruins will look kind of like the fire temple sort of aesthetic. So yeah, the aesthetic of their buildings will change depending on what map you're playing on, which I think is really, really cool. But yeah, so they don't start on the start location. They start on the ruins that are closest to a start location. Which on most maps is like just outside of the ring of a start location. So they're usually pretty close to the start location. But anyway, so I'll go ahead and capture these ruins up here, and I'll go ahead and capture the village site here. Let me give myself a bunch of resources, but I'm not going to turn instant build on yet. Anyway. So, what do the Stalfos do with these kind of locations on the map then? All the other factions at the moment, they can capture these kind of village sites and then turn them into a civil center and make a second base there. But what the Stalfos do is they find these locations and they turn them into a giant graveyard, which serves as an inexhaustible source of corpses for them. So these points are actually really important for the Stalfos, because they are your best source of food to make more units. So I guess I'll go ahead and talk about that aspect of the Stalfos. And that is how the Stalfos get food. They don't get food like most factions. They don't have farms. They can't gather from bushes. They need the corpses of enemies or wild animals in order to increase their stock of food. And there's quite a few ways they can go about that. The first is that they can kill wild animals and then bring their corpses back to their base, and that increases their food count. They can convert ruins into a particular building that spawns piles of bones, which I'll go ahead and do now. The building's called Defiled Grave. So I'm converting these ruins into a defiled grave, and then you'll see like piles of bones start to build up around the building, and then their workers can gather the bones from those pile of bones, and then they can convert those bones and corpses into new units. And then I think I already said that the giant graveyard here is an inexhaustible source of corpses and bones to increase their food count. However, the disadvantage of this source is that they're usually pretty far, or far enough from your civil center, that your workers will be vulnerable going to it and coming back. And you'll need a pretty large stream of workers in order to get a pretty steady source of food. So you'll need to guard your little trails of stall children from enemies, because that's a pretty good way for your enemies to harass your workers. Now, to kind of mitigate the sort of negative effects of having a vulnerable trail of workers, the Stalfos worker battalions are larger than the worker battalions of any other faction. I believe they have 7, and if you pick Dampie, they'll actually have 8. Most worker battalions are 3 or 4, so they have the largest size battalions of any workers in the game. So when you send them all to gather corpses from these giant graveyards here, they'll actually... It takes a little while, but there'll eventually be like a trail, like a constant trail of stall children going between the grave and the civil center, and it looks pretty cool. In fact, because the Stalfos don't have like a drop-off point that you can build near resources, their trails of workers aren't really uncommon for a lot of their different resources, but most of the resource hotspots on the map have these large ruins that you can capture near them. So like the stone and metal here are pretty close to the ruins that you'd capture and convert. So it's mostly the giant graveyards here that have the really long and vulnerable trails. But anyway, the last source of food for the Stalfos are these small graves, which you'll always start out with 3 of them pretty close to your start location, but some maps will just have like little graveyards like this spread throughout the map that your stall children can gather from. So yeah, that is how they go about getting food or bones or corpses. So yeah. I already talked about how they get buildings. You have to capture these ruins and convert them. However, there are some situations where it might be difficult to capture some ruins and expand your base. So the Stalfos do have an emergency kind of backup way to get more buildings, which costs a lot of rupees. So this way is more expensive, but if you're having difficulty finding other ruins to capture and convert, your central building here can actually unearth new ruins within your territory. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll raise a few of these from the earth. So as you can see, these cracks in the earth have formed, and now these ruins are coming out of the ground. And you can use stall children to increase the speed that they dig up, although they dig up pretty fast. I'll probably lower the speed that they come out of the ground, so it'll encourage the player to use stall children to help dig them up. They come up slowly on their own, though. So, yeah. Anyway. This is another way for the Stalfos to make more buildings. It's just a lot more expensive than capturing ruins and converting them. So you'll probably only want to do this if you can't find ruins and you're having a lot of trouble. Or you've put a bunch of stall children on the little rupee deposits so that you have a lot of rupees. However, a lot of the Stalfos units require rupees to create, so they're actually a pretty rupee-intensive faction compared to most of the factions that are in the game right now. But anyway, I'll go ahead and convert these all into their structures that make their units. And I guess I'll go ahead and go through their roster after that. So yeah, these are all converting. All their buildings are currently using Hylian sound effects. I gotta go in and give them all nice, creepy Stalfos sound effects, because I don't think the marching really suits them. Or that sound definitely doesn't suit the Stalfos. Anyway, I'll go ahead and turn instant build on, and I will go ahead and make a bunch of the Stalfos' units. So let me go ahead and train all of their units, and I'll go ahead and demonstrate them. I don't think I trained that one. Oh no, he's right there. So train those guys and these ones. Alrighty, let me get all these guys information so that I can go through them a little easier. And some of these are hero units, so let me put the hero units off to the side. That one's a hero unit. I'll go ahead and talk about the hero units either at the end of the video when I show all the heroes, or if I decide to do a second video on the Stalfos heroes. So yeah, those three I'll keep over there. Anyway, so there are 3 Stalfos units that I want to single out before I go through the entire roster. And let me turn off instant build. I want this one, and this one, and where's the Stalkin? There they are, down there. Alright, these 3 units. So, these 3 units here are actually units that you won't be able to train normally. There is a feature that doesn't quite work yet in 0.25, which is one of the reasons I don't want to release this yet. And that is the ability to raise units from the corpses of enemies. Anyway, sorry about the little hiccup there. OBS just freaked out on me. Anyway, the cool thing about these 3 units is that these are the 3 units that you can raise from the corpses of enemies. And because of that, the aesthetics and appearance of these 3 units will change depending on what creature they're raised from. Now, it's going to take me 25 million years to model every possible variation. So, when I first release this, there's just going to be these 3 appearances. And then as time goes on, I will model kind of like a general appearance. So, like, if you raise corpses from a Hylian, they'll look like Hylians. If you raise corpses from a Gerudo, they'll look like Gerudo. And then, when I've got all the factions in the game and I've kind of finished everything, then that is when I will start going into obsessive detail. So, like, if you kill a Hylian archer, it'll be raised as a Hylian archer, and etc, etc, etc. So, that's going to take a fucking eternity to do. So, for now, they'll appear as these 3, and then in future versions, they'll appear as general races, and then in the hypothetical final version of Hyrule Conquest that will take 50 years to finish, they will look like all of the particular individuals that were slain and raised as the undead. But anyway, the 3 units are based on the size of the enemy that was slain. So if you slay very small enemies like Kokiri or Bokoblins or things like that, your necromancers will raise a Stalkin from the corpse, which are the little tiny small stabby skeletons. So yeah, small creatures like Kokiri or Bokoblins, they'll turn into these guys. Medium-sized enemies, which are the vast majority of units in the game, will raise Stall troops. So, Hylians, Gerudo, Zora, Ordanians, what else? Most everything in Hyrule. Most of the units and most factions are medium-sized, so these are probably the guys you'll be raising the most of. And then the large corpses, the Stall Giants. So, Hinoxes, Darknuts, what else? Bokonoxes, the creatures like that, the really big ones, they'll get raised as Stall Giants, which are these guys. And this one is an undead Hinox. So, yeah. Statistically, it doesn't really matter what race the corpse comes from. So whether it's a Kokiri or a Bokoblin, the stats will be the same for all the Stalkin. The stats will be the same for all of the Stall troops, and the stats will be all the same for the Stall giants. So statistically, the variation is mostly for just aesthetic appearances, not really like you don't really. There isn't a difference between an undead Kokiri and an undead Bokoblin. They're small corpses that shamble around and try and stab at their enemies. It's more so, like I said, just for aesthetic purposes. But anyway, that is the 3 units that they can raise from the corpses of enemies. And this guy right here is the unit that will do that. And he is the Poe Necromancer. So he is just by himself, and he goes around, and he will be able to park himself near the corpses of enemies, and then we haven't decided yet if it will be automatic or like a button you press, but whatever the case is, all of the corpses around him will slowly start to transform into either Stallkin or Stall troops or Stall giants. So yeah, that is the Poe Necromancer. Anyway, the rest of the Stalfos units are not made from raising corpses of enemies on the field. They are raised from screwing around with corpses at your buildings and kind of Frankensteining them into horrific undead abominations. So, let's see, which one should I start with? I'll start with the bubbles. The bubbles are just made from the skulls of the corpses that your Stall children harvest. And the bubbles are basically your very weak early game Zergling kind of unit. They're relatively fast. That's one thing I don't think I pointed out, but you probably noticed, is most of the Stalfos units move very, very slowly. So they're a lot like the Dark Nuts in that regard. Most of their units are really, really slow, which makes the few of their units that are fast very valuable, and the bubbles are one of them. In fact, not only are the bubbles fast, but they can hover over any terrain. So they can go up cliffs, they can go over mountains, they can go over bodies of water, which makes them very maneuverable. So they're very, very useful to the Stalfos. Although, even though they hover, they don't count as a flying unit, so they can still be attacked by melee units. So that is something to keep in mind. But otherwise, they're a very, very weak melee unit that just tries to bite at their enemies. So they're pretty easy to kill. They're mostly useful as kind of like an early game harassing unit to kind of like harass enemy workers and things like that. In fact, that makes them pretty good to be paired up with this unit here, which is the Stallhounds. Another one of the Stalfos' only really fast-moving units. These guys are really good for harassing workers, because they're even faster than the bubbles. So they're not a cavalry unit, they're a creature unit, but their speed makes them really, really, really useful, especially in the early game. Or even in the late game, like if you're facing a bunch of archers and you have a few of these guys, you can just send them to to maul those archers to death, and then turn those archers into more corpses for your little Poe Necromancer. So yeah, that is the Stallhound. Probably my favorite unit. Nah, they're not my favorite Stalfos unit, but they're one of my favorite Stalfos units because they're undead doggies. I guess I will talk about one of my favorite Stalfos units next, and that is the Battleforge. These guys. Now, the Battleforged, they're based on the design from Wind Waker. Now, what's interesting about these guys is that if they are killed in battle, you can click on their corpse, and for the cost of some rupees, you can have them reassemble their corpses and come back to life. They'll probably be at about like 25% health or 50% health though, so they'll still be damaged, but you basically give them a second chance to keep bashing enemies to death. So yeah, they can cheat death twice if you have enough money for it. But in addition to that, they actually have pretty high armor values. That's one of the weaknesses of the Stalfos army, is they have really bad armor values. Most of their units will take full damage from most enemy types, but this is one of their few units that actually has really decent armor. And they got 300 HP, so they're pretty beefy, meaty units for the Stalfos, because most of their units are actually relatively fragile. But kind of background on these guys is they've been like Frankenstein together by the corpses of a bunch of random creatures, and they've been sort of like twisted by some weird undead ritual, which is why their faces are all like twisted and screwed up. So yeah, they're not raised from a specific species in Hyrule. They're like a Frankenstein amalgamation of different creatures, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, I guess I will talk about another Stalfos unit that has decent armor, and that is the Stall Knights, which is kind of their bread and butter unit, I would say. Statistically, they're actually pretty close to the Hylian Knights, although they move much slower. I think they have relatively the same armor values. Their HP might be a little bit lower, though. But the Stalfos Knights, they were Hylian Knights in life, but they voluntarily and willingly submitted themselves to some necromancers to gain the power of immortality, and in doing so, they became undead slaves, because of course they did. So, unlike most of the other Stalfos, they're a little bit more aware of their situation, but they're still slaves to their masters. But they're a really, really good melee unit with decent armor. And you'll probably want to fill out like half your army with these guys, just because they're so... they have few weaknesses, I guess that's the best way of putting it. Really, their only weakness is that they're slow. But yeah, that's the Stalfos Knight. Alrighty, what unit should I do next? I guess I'll go through their skeletal units, and then I'll get into the Poe stuff after that. So yeah, Stall Horses, a cavalry unit. Now, for most other factions, just a standard cavalry unit isn't particularly special, but because the Stalfos have so few units that are fast, it instantly makes their kind of vanilla cavalry unit valuable just because it's fast. There's nothing particularly special about them in terms of their abilities or statistics. They're just like a normal cavalry unit, but because they're so fast, they're extremely useful to the Stalfos for running down archers and things like that. Or capturing, ruins on the map really fast before enemies capture them and kind of deny you access to them and things like that. So yeah, they're pretty valuable, even though there's nothing super special about them in terms of their stats. And then, oh yeah, the scout unit. I forgot to talk about them. The Eyesore is the Stalfos scout unit, so it can detect invisible units, and it has a pretty big line of sight, which, because I revealed the whole map, I can't really demonstrate the line of sight, but they can see really far, and you can use them to scout out the map. They're a hovering unit, so they can go over mountains and water. So yeah, they're just a really, really good scout unit. And I think, unlike most scout units, you can actually train them in the early game before you start teching up. So that's really useful too. And then the last skeletal Stalfos unit that is not a hero unit. Oh, sorry, second to last. The Redead, which is definitely probably one of, if not my favorite, Stalfos unit. Just because they're so freaking terrifying. So when you select the Redead, you'll notice this little circle around it. Any enemy that comes into the circle will start moving very, very slowly, and their attack rate will be much slower. So these guys are debuffing units. They'll dramatically, if you have like a bunch of these guys, they'll dramatically like lower the speed of enemies, and because I think you'll be able to attach them to battalions, they'll basically protect your... that sort of translates into your battalions taking less damage over time. So they lower the DPS of enemies, which is very, very useful. And then when we add abilities, active abilities into the game, they'll have the ability where you click on it and they'll scream and they'll stun everything, everything around them. Like, just completely stun them for like 3 to 5 seconds. I haven't decided on the time, obviously. So yeah, they're going to be a really useful unit for the Stalfos. Because the Stalfos army is so slow that it'll be really useful to kind of slow down the enemy army to bring them down to their level with a bunch of Redeads. So yeah, that's the Redead. Anyway, the last Stalfos unit, that is a skeletal corpse, that is not a hero unit, is the Stalmaster, which is this guy. He is the commander unit for the Stalfos, so he improves all of their stats, you know, everyone within the giant ring, which you'll see the little commander crown above the units. So he's the commander unit. Unlike the commander units of most factions, he's got a few other nifty abilities. He deals splash damage because he can attack everything around him with his 4 arms. And I'm thinking when we add abilities into the game, he will be able to swap out his weapons for weapons of your choice. So he could probably swap out one of his swords for an axe, one of his other weapons for, you know, a polearm maybe. So you can maybe customize their commander for the situation. Sorry, that little cuckoo who was running around him was distracting me. That's funny. I'm going to kill him. Aw, poor little cuckoo. Anyway, he shouldn't have been running around a giant monstrous skeleton in the first place. Anyway, yeah, that's the Stalmaster, who's probably one of the best commander units in the game, actually. I think, trying to think of one in the game that's actually better than him right now. The Moblin one's pretty good. The Hylian commander has really good stats, but is nowhere near as beefy as this guy. So, the fairy commander is actually more powerful than this guy. So other than the fairy commander unit, this is the best commander unit in the game right now. In fact, the fairy commander unit actually also has 4 arms. The great fairy with the 4 arms. So that's kind of a coincidence, but yeah, that's the Stalmaster. Alrighty, so I guess I will talk about the Poe units now. So I already talked about the Stall troops, so I'll move them out of the way. And I'll talk about the Poes. So in addition to corpses, the Stalfos have a few units that are not skeletons. They can be trained from haunted ruins, and they are all some variation of Poe or Ghost. So I'll start with just the normal Poes. I'll get these guys out of the way for now. Actually, I already talked about one of their Poe units, the Necromancer, so I won't go over them again. But anyway, the first Poe unit that the Stalfos have is just the Poes, the little guys with the lanterns. And these units have camouflage, so when they're completely still, they are invisible to enemies. They will only be visible when they are attacking, or your enemy has a scout in their army, or they get too close to a guard tower, which can see through invisible units. So yeah, those are Poes. They're pretty slow moving, however, they can pass through any terrain. And even better, not only can they pass over any terrain, like water and mountains and stuff, they can phase through buildings. So these guys can bypass enemy walls and just go right through them. Although, even if they couldn't go through walls, I guess you could just have them like climb over or fly over a mountain. Although it's possible for an enemy to like completely conceal their base in a wall. So yeah, these guys are useful for sneaking into an enemy base. I can already see them like sneaking into like a Goron base that's been completely walled, and like going towards the back and like start picking off their workers. And these guys, I think you can train them in the early game too. So even though they're slow, they might be a pretty good unit to start picking off enemy workers. So yeah, those are the Poes. Next up is the Big Poe, who is a bigger version of the Poe. Now, what is different about the big Poe and the little Poes is you will be able to attach this guy to a battalion, and kind of like the Poe Necromancer, he will be able to raise Poes from the corpses of enemies. So, yeah. He basically can summon more Poes to battle to replenish his battalion of Poes with the corpses of enemies, which is pretty useful. So you can kind of turn the dead enemy units into your own units in a slightly different way from raising corpses. But otherwise, he attacks the same way as the Poes. He kind of like flings his lantern at enemies and sets them on fire. Alrighty, so I think those are all of the Poe units. However, they do have one more late game ghost unit that I guess is technically not a Poe, but that is the Phantom Riders from Twilight Princess. And these are definitely one of my favorite units. They're ghost horse knights that can run over any terrain, so they can run over mountains and they can run over water. But not only that, like the Poes, they can run through enemy walls, which is just freaking awesome. So I'm just imagining, like, an enemy base. They've got, like, their wall set up. They've got their army behind the wall, and there's just, like, a line of these guys, like 5 or 6 or 7 battalions of these ghost horses just running at the wall. And they all come, like, running right through the wall and, like, into the enemy units. It'll be so cool. So, yeah, these are a very, very late game, ghost cavalry unit, which is just freaking awesome. Unlike the other Poes, though, they don't have camouflage and they're not invisible, because that would just be freaking... That would be so overpowered. Invisible ghost knights on horses that can run through walls. That's just... I don't know. Maybe they have an upgrade where you can give them camouflage or stealth, but for now they don't, because it just seems like it'd be way too powerful. Anyway, we can see a nice trail of Stallchildren workers here going to this grave. So yeah, I think I got through their roster of units in a decent time, so I think I will talk about the Stalfos heroes and their hero units in this video. So let me double check and make sure there's no features I missed. And if there isn't, I'm just going to do an awkward cut in the video and talk about their heroes. Let me see, is there anything I missed? Oh yeah, I'll also show their Titan unit in I'll show their Titan unit with the heroes. Let's see. Yeah, I think I got all their units. Talked about how they get corpses. I talked about how they get buildings. Yeah, I think I covered everything. So I'll go ahead and end this part of the video here. And in a few seconds, I'll start rambling on about all the Stalfos heroes. I'll go ahead and place them on the map and show them and their hero units. Alright, see you guys in a moment. Alrighty. I am back, and we're going to talk about the Stalfos heroes and their hero units. So, guess we'll just get right into this, and we'll talk about Dampie first. Dampie, who I believe first appeared in Ocarina of Time, and to my surprise, I found out he's been in more Zelda games than Ganondorf, which is funny to me. He's one of the most recurring characters. Kind of similar to Malon. I didn't realize Malon was actually such a recurring character until like a year or two ago. But anyway, a little bit off topic. Dampie, the Gravedigger. He is one of the Tier 1 heroes that the Stalfos can pick. He's a support hero. He'll mostly improve workers, so he'll increase the battalion size of Stalchildren. I think upping them from 7 to 8. He'll be able to just dig up Stalchildren out of the ground when we add active abilities into the engine and things like that. So yeah, he's pretty slow like most of the Stalfos, and he's not very good in combat. He's mostly kind of like an early game support buffing kind of hero sort of thing. So opposite of him is a beefy combat kind of hero. Gaara, the crazy undead forge or blacksmith from Majora's Mask, the partner of Zubora, who made the Sword of Phantom Ganon and the Sword of the Death Sword. That was a lot of swords, but yeah. So in Nephi canon, he is tied to the creation of weaponry that the Stalfos use, and his partner. Although his partner is absent right now for reasons that'll stay under wraps, but he is an early game hero, but despite that, he himself is actually pretty strong. He's statistically like a Dark Nut. He's slow moving. He's got a pretty good armor value. He likes to scratch his head with the tip of his hammer, and he deals knockback damage and flings enemies around, so that's pretty cool. But yeah, it's Gaara. He mostly gives you armor-related bonuses, and the Stalfos have really terrible armor values across the board, so if you want better armor for your armies, you're gonna pick this guy. Anyway, now we get into some of the crazier heroes. First up is Meg, one of the Poe sisters from Ocarina of Time. And I think she was in one other Zelda game, but I'm drawing a blank. I want to say she was from one of the 2D ones, but it's going to bother me. I keep wanting to say Four Sword Adventures, but I'm pretty sure she's not from that one. But anyway, Meg, one of the four Poe sisters. Well, I guess she's kind of the owner of the Forest Temple. I don't want to spoil too much of her background, because I actually have some interesting ideas for her that I really need to work out with Deox that I haven't been able to go over with him yet. But anyway, she's a Poe hero, so naturally she improves the Poes. I believe she gives the big Poes like a freezing ice attack, and I think she increases the battalion size of Poes, if I remember right. I'm blanking on her, one of the things she does, because I mostly improvise these videos. I usually have like little notes on a thing on the side that says what I want to discuss, but I didn't do it this time. So she does something else related to Poes. But her unit that she gives you actually isn't a Poe, but it is these guys from the Forest Temple and Ocarina of Time, and it is the Lost Souls, which are kind of like the Stalfos Knights, except they are able to run. So they're a Stalfos infantry unit that is actually really fast moving, which is very unusual for the Stalfos. So they give them a lot of speed, which is something that definitely is very helpful, because most of the Stalfos units are freaking slow. So you train quite a few of these guys, and you have them leading your slow-moving army. You have them up in the front to kind of maybe serve as cannon fodder, and they rush into an enemy army and kind of distract them while your slower army moves into position and then starts hacking away at them. But another useful thing about these guys is they actually have a very high dodge rate. So even though they don't have the best armor, their HP is actually pretty low for an infantry unit. It's only 100. Most attacks, I think their parry rating is 50. Let me look. Where's their dodge? Dodge rating, 65%! That's probably too high. At the moment, their dodge rating is 65%, so 65% of all attacks will just completely miss them. I'm probably going to lower it to 50, because 65 is pretty high. I mean, it's not that much higher than 50, but anyway, I think their dodge rating will be 50% in the final game. So yeah, half of enemy attacks will miss them, so they're really good at running up into an enemy formation and kind of distracting them while your slower units move into attack position. But yeah, that is the Lost Souls. That is Meg's hero unit. So I'll go ahead and just move them off to over there. Anyway, I guess next up I'll talk about Irene, who is a flying unit, a flying mage unit that flings fireballs at enemies. I think other than Vakat and Vire, she's one of only 3 flying hero units in the game at the moment. Ooh. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, she flings fireballs, which is awesome. Her abilities actually center around capturing ruins and making buildings and stuff. So if you pick her as one of your heroes, you'll be able to summon the ruins from the ground for a cheaper price. This thing here, where you summon the ruins out of the ground. It'll cost less rupees to do that. And I think she also makes their summoning faster too. So if you pick her, you'll be able to make your bases and stuff easier. And I think she allows your Poe Necromancers to summon bubbles, if I remember right, from each... So, like, if you have your Poe Necromancer and you summon a Stall Troop from an enemy corpse, in addition to the Stall Troop, there is a chance that a little bubble will summon from the corpse also. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's the third thing she gives the Stalfos. But anyway, her unit is the blue bubble, which are these guys here. The blue bubbles are like normal bubbles, except they are on blue fire. And they have the really neat ability where they can jinx enemy units that attack them in melee. If you'll notice, when I select them, they've got these relatively larger rings around them. Any enemy that steps in that ring is at risk of being jinxed. So these guys, when they attack an enemy that's within this ring, that enemy will, their attack damage and attack rate will temporarily be lowered. And there's a chance they just won't even be able to attack at all until the effect wears off. So these guys are debuffing units. They will, they're... In my mind, they're pretty good when you pair them up with Redeads, because the Redeads will be slowing like the movement speed and the attack speed of enemies, and then these guys will just be crippling their ability to even deal damage in the first place. So yeah, these are probably really good paired up with Redeads. But in addition to that, if these guys die, there's a chance that they won't die and they'll just turn into a normal bubble. So I'll go ahead and kill this whole battalion. And 3 of them just turn into normal bubbles. So yeah, even when they die, there's still a chance that they'll be able to keep on attacking an enemy as normal bubbles. But anyway, that is Irene and her hero unit. She does not seem amused. But anyway, next up is Blind the Thief, or Stallblind if you prefer. This guy. From A Link to the Past and also A Link Between Worlds. And I kind of combined the two versions of him into one. So he's got the sword and shield that he had in A Link Between Worlds, but when we add unit abilities into the game, he'll be able to like shoot a giant fireball from his mouth, and he'll be able to sever his head to fly around and things like that. In fact, I'm thinking when he dies, just his head will just automatically like break off and hover around and basically turn into like a giant bubble. So yeah, if I remember right, he gives the Stalfos kind of like stealth sort of abilities. He'll make it so that your Stalkins and Stall Troops have stealth, I think. So these guys here. So that's pretty useful. And he himself actually is also has camouflage. So as long as he's completely still, he's invisible to enemies, which is awesome. And if I remember right, he actually has magic resistance too, because he's got a mirror shield. So he can deflect magic attacks back at enemies, which is also pretty awesome. But anyway, his hero unit is the Staldra. These little guys from Skyward Sword, which I think is the only game that they've appeared in. And they are a multi-headed undead creature unit. And the cool thing about them is that they're actually, I think they're a mid-game unit, so you can train them relatively early. which is interesting because most of the tier 3 hero units are kind of like a late game unit. But you can train them relatively early, but even though they're small, their stats are relatively low. They deal a lot of splash damage, which I think they're the only small unit in the game that does anything like that right now. Their 3 heads will attack multiple enemies around them, so they're really good at just spreading damage across a large number of enemies in a melee. So that's pretty good. And if I remember right, they actually deal poison damage too. So they'll keep dealing damage to an enemy even after they've stopped directly attacking them. So yeah, they're very high damage dealers, which is very useful for any faction, really. Yeah, that's the Staldra. If I remember right, I don't think they have camouflage. No, they don't have camouflage, so they're not invisible. But yeah, that is Stallblind and his hero unit. And the last Stalfos hero is the Death Sword from Twilight Princess, one of the coolest mini-bosses in the entire Zelda series. So I'll go ahead and bring him over here. So the Death Sword is obviously a tier 3 Stalfos unit, or Stalfos hero. He deals knockback damage. I believe he deals true damage too. So he'll just completely ignore enemy armor and deal the full damage of his attack. I think he also what else? I think he doesn't have, at the moment he has camouflage, so when he's completely still he's invisible, but I'm actually going to make it so that when we add abilities into the game, it's more like he can switch between being like a ghost or not a ghost. So he'll be completely invisible when he's a ghost, and then when he phases back into his kind of a non-ghost form, then he can start attacking enemies and stuff. Kind of like how Sauron works in the Edain mod, I think. It's been a long time since I played that mod, but I think that's how Sauron worked in that one. Anyway, yeah, that is the Death Sword. And his kind of focus is just massing tons and tons of crappy, cheap units and resurrecting Stalfos units that have died. So if I remember right, he increases the battalion size of almost every Stalfos unit, except for the Pose, or the Ghost units, so all the skeletal units. And when one of the Stalfos units die, any of the Stalfos units that are skeletons, when they're slain, if you pick him as your hero, I think there's like a 10% chance that they'll just get right back up, like, free of charge. So, yeah, that's kind of his focus. And his hero unit is the Stall Reaper, or the Blue Stalfos, as they're called in Oracle of Ages, which is a hovering mage unit that throws giant fireballs, and they're actually a siege unit. The Stalfos actually have really bad siege capability. I think their only other siege unit is the giant Stalfos, and their Pose deal fire damage, so their Pose can actually do quite a bit of damage to buildings, but he's like the only real unit that can deal tons of damage to buildings, because he hurls this huge fireball. But he's good against normal units too, because his giant fireball does tons of splash damage, and any unit that's, in the radius of the impact is going to get burned. But yeah, I like the Stall Reapers. They're pretty cool. They're just like these hovering mages of doom that hurl blue fireballs. They're a very expensive late game unit. But anyway, one other thing that the Death Sword does is he transforms all of the normal Redeads you have into Redead Knight. So he kind of sort of has a second hero unit, but it's more like an upgrade to an existing unit. So all your Redeads will get the little bits of armor and like the giant swords. So they still have all the same abilities of normal Redeads, but they also like have a really strong melee attack in addition to that. So yeah, that's the Redead Knight. kind of a hero unit and kind of an upgrade to an existing unit. Alrighty, that is all the Stalfos heroes and all of their hero units and stuff. So I think I will go ahead and make their Titan, which means I need to make their Wonder, which means I need to fully upgrade this building. So I'll go ahead and fully upgrade it. And yeah, I had to click on it like 7 times. But anyway, we'll go ahead and make their Wonder, which is the Arbiter's Ground. Go ahead and summon it from right there. And fast build is on, so it's just coming out of the ground super fast. Alrighty. And I'll go ahead and make their Titan unit, which is the... drumroll please, the Stallord from Twilight Princess. Who I need to make it so he ducks under that archway when he comes out. Which, I have to be honest, he might be my favorite Titan unit in the game right now. He just might be. I really like the Goma one, which, a heads up, the Goma Titan's actually going to probably be changed soon. I really need to talk to Deox about that, but the current Goma Titan is, like, probably my favorite Titan, but he's going to be moved elsewhere. But this guy is probably my favorite. This is probably one of my favorite bosses in the entire, like, Zelda series. Definitely my favorite boss in Twilight Princess. He's just so cool. He's like a dragon who's like missing his wings. He's missing his lower legs, and he like just vomits up corpses that turn into stall troops. In fact, that's kind of his focus. Is even though he's like really big, you might think he's like a siege hero, but he's actually a not a siege hero, a siege titan, but he's not. He is a summoning titan, so his kind of focus is just summoning crap tons of stall troops. In fact, he can raise enemy corpses into units. He will vomit up corpses when we add abilities into the game. He can just like vomit up a bunch of corpses that'll transform into stall troops. And as he takes damage, and this is currently in the game right now, so when we release this, it'll work. When he takes damage from enemies, just parts of him will break off and turn into stall troops, and he'll just start like amassing stall troops around him as he keeps taking damage. So this guy is awesome. He will help increase the size of your army in battle, which is really cool. And when we add replenishing battalions into the game, I'm pretty sure he'll make it so that you can replenish your battalions like anywhere on the map. Or any battalion that's near him will just replenish their battalion with units that they've lost. So yeah, that is the Stallord. Definitely, I want to say he's my favorite Titan, but he's probably like my second favorite one. I like Bongo Bongo a lot, so I don't know. He might be my second or third favorite. But anyway, that is the Stallord, and I think I went through all the Stalfos stuff. So yeah, I hope you guys like the looks of the Stalfos. I really hope that I have them released to the public sometime in the next month, but that really depends on how long it takes us to get everything working in 0.25. There's still some things that are not working. In fact, I think I said it earlier in the other part of the video. If you're a patron and you want to give the Stalfos a test run, just message me and let me know, and I'll go ahead and upload it so that you can try it. Just, please take note that, there's some things that are buggy. Like, I got rid of them on this map, but predators can't be killed. Although, I think Ascaris just messaged me that he figured out how to fix that. But there's other things that won't work, like knockback technically works, but it'll be really wonky. You'll see like some guys floating in the air and stuff when they if they get knocked back. So there's still things that are not working right. Stealth units don't show the little lens of truth icon above their heads. That's broken. There's still things in 0.25 that's broken. But if you really want to try the Stalfos, and you're willing to put up with some wonkiness, just let me know, and I'll go ahead and upload this for you guys. Otherwise, hopefully sometime in the next month we will have a completely stable version of 0.25, and we'll release the Stalfos, and you guys can all have a lot of fun, and we'll have the corpse thing working properly. I'll go ahead and make a little video showing the corpse stuff when we have that working, yada 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 yada. So yeah, anyway, hopefully you guys like this video, and stay tuned for more.